The mystery hidden behind the symbols of the compass and square determined the fate of Europe for 3 centuries. The Freemasons, a brotherhood that was supposed to unite the continent with the ideals of enlightenment, actually divided it with national contradictions. French lodges prepared revolutions. English ones defended the empire. German ones served science. And Italian ones fought for unity. 1 order, 4 paths. 4 concepts of the future. Their hidden confrontation shaped history from Versailles to Berlin, from masonic salons to battlefields. Today, we will reveal the true drama of European Freemasonry. The story of how the dream of universal brotherhood gave rise to wars, revolutions, and ideological conflicts, the echoes of which can still be heard today. European Freemasonry showed that even the noblest ideals can serve opposite goals. Brotherhood turned into a battlefield of national interests. Subscribe to the channel to learn more about the hidden pages of history. And in the comments, discuss: were the Freemasons really an influential force, or simply a reflection of their time? What role do secret societies play in modern politics? London, 1717. At the Goose and Spit Tavern, 4 English lodges make a decision that will change the course of European history. The creation of the first Grand Lodge marked the beginning of organized Freemasonry. But none of the assembled brothers could have foreseen what their brainchild would become on the continent. Freemasonry began as a brotherhood of builders who kept the secrets of stone masonry. But by the beginning of the 18th century, it had become something greater, a philosophical movement that united people from different social classes with common ideals of liberty, equality, and brotherhood. These principles, born in English lodges, crossed the English Channel and found completely different interpretations in each country. Freemasonry appeared in France as early as 1725, brought there by Jacobite emigrants. Lord Derwentwater founded the first French lodge, unaware that he was creating an instrument of future revolution. From the very beginning, French Freemasons differed from their English counterparts in their greater political activity and philosophical radicalism. In Germany, Freemasonry was established with the support of Frederick the Great himself, who initiated his brothers into the lodge in 1740. The Prussian king saw Freemasonry as a means of enlightening and modernizing his state. German lodges became centers of scientific thought and administrative reform. 18th century Italy was a patchwork quilt of principalities and republics. Freemasonry penetrated here through French and English connections, but quickly took on a national character. Italian Freemasons dreamed not only of enlightenment, but also of the political unification of their fragmented homeland. Each country created its own Masonic tradition, reflecting national characteristics and political needs. English Freemasons remained loyal to the monarchy and the empire. The French sought radical change. The Germans focused on intellectual development. The Italians prepared for a national revolution. By the end of the 18th century, there were thousands of lodges in Europe, uniting hundreds of thousands of people. Formally, they recognized the same principles and rituals, but in reality, they pursued opposite goals. This contradiction laid the foundation for conflicts that would shake the continent for the next 2 centuries. The paradox of European Freemasonry was that the idea of universal brotherhood gave rise to national contradictions. Freemasons from different countries, meeting in lodges, exchanged handshakes as brothers, but in politics, they became irreconcilable opponents. The seeds of future conflicts were sown at the very moment of the birth of continental Freemasonry. The history of European lodges is a history of hidden ideological struggles under the guise of brotherly unity. Behind common symbols and rituals lay radically different ideas about the future of Europe. English Freemasons defended the status quo. French Freemasons prepared for revolution. German Freemasons built a new science, and Italian Freemasons dreamed of a united nation. Versailles, the 1780s. The names of Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot resound in the luxurious salons of the French aristocracy. But behind the closed doors of the lodges, meetings are taking place that are preparing the collapse of the old regime. French Freemasons become the architects of the revolution, unaware that they are creating a monster that will devour many of them. The Grand Orient de France, founded in 1773, united most of the French lodges under its leadership. Unlike English Freemasonry, the French brothers did not shy away from political discussions from the very beginning. On the contrary, they saw the lodges as a platform for discussing ideas for social reform. The Marquis de Lafayette, a hero of the American Revolution, returned to France with ideas of republican freedom. In Masonic lodges, he found like-minded people among the educated elite. Abbé Sieyès, author of the famous pamphlet What is the Third Estate, was also an active Freemason. Philosophical discussions in the lodges gradually turned into revolutionary propaganda. A distinctive feature of French Freemasonry was the mixing of Enlightenment ideas with political radicalism. English Freemasons were content with moral self-improvement, while the French sought to reshape society according to the laws of reason. The ideas of natural law, social contract, and separation of powers were actively discussed in Parisian lodges. By 1780, there were about 700 lodges in France, uniting approximately 50,000 people. The Freemasons included representatives of all social classes, from dukes to merchants, from officers to lawyers. This social mosaic created a unique atmosphere where aristocrats and bourgeoisie discussed the future of the country as equals. The financial crisis of Louis XVI became a catalyst for Masonic activity. The lodges became centers for coordinating opposition sentiment. The brothers not only criticized the existing order, but also developed concrete plans for reform. Masonic connections ensured the rapid spread of revolutionary ideas throughout the country. Jacques-Pierre Brissot, the future leader of the Girondins, wrote in his memoirs about the role of lodges in preparing for the revolution. According to him, it was in Masonic meetings that public opinion, ready for radical change, was formed. Lodges served as a school of political activity for future revolutionaries. Paradoxically, many French aristocrats who were Freemasons sincerely believed that they could steer the popular movement in a civilized direction. They saw themselves as enlightened mentors of the nation, capable of carrying out peaceful reforms. History cruelly laughed at their naivety. The Masonic principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity became the slogans of the revolution, but their practical implementation turned out to be far from Masonic ideals. The terror unleashed by the Jacobins claimed the lives of many Freemasons, including Louis XVI himself, who, according to some sources, had been initiated into the lodge while still a prince. French Freemasons created the intellectual foundation of the revolution, but lost control of the element they themselves had awakened. Their tragedy became a symbol of the contradictions of the Enlightenment. Noble ideas gave rise to bloody practices. London, the 1790s. While Paris burns in the fires of revolution, English Freemasons gather in their lodges under portraits of kings, and sing hymns in honor of George III. English Freemasonry chooses the path of conservatism and imperial grandeur, becoming the ideological antithesis of French radicalism. The United Grand Lodge of England, formed in 1813 by the merger of two rival organizations, established principles that radically distinguished English Freemasonry from its continental counterpart. The ban on political and religious discussions, loyalty to the monarchy, and an emphasis on respect for tradition all made English Freemasons allies of the existing order. The Duke of Sussex, Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge, was the son of King George III. His appointment symbolized the close connection between Freemasonry and the British Crown. Unlike French lodges, where the overthrow of the monarchy was discussed, English Freemasons prayed for the health of the royal family and the prosperity of the empire. The Industrial Revolution created a new class of English entrepreneurs, many of whom became Freemasons. In the lodges, they found not revolutionary ideology, but business connections and social prestige. Freemasonry served as a tool for integrating the bourgeoisie into the existing system, rather than destroying it. The British Empire expanded throughout the world, and Masonic lodges followed the flag. In India, Australia, Canada, and South Africa, branches of English Freemasonry were established, which served as strongholds of imperial influence. Masonic colonizers saw their mission as spreading British civilization among backward peoples. Admiral Nelson, the hero of Trafalgar, was an active Freemason. His victories over the French fleet were seen by English lodges as the triumph of the righteous cause over revolutionary chaos. Masonic connections helped coordinate the actions of the British fleet in different parts of the world. A distinctive feature of English Freemasonry was its aristocratic character. While French lodges attracted intellectuals from various walks of life, English lodges remained the privilege of gentlemen. The rituals emphasized hierarchy and discipline, reflecting the structure of British society. Winston Churchill, although he lived after the period under consideration, perfectly expressed the spirit of English Freemasonry. Our lodges are schools of patriotism and loyalty to the Crown. These words could have been spoken by any English Freemason of the late 18th century. The trade wars with France also had a Masonic dimension. English Masonic merchants saw the French Revolution as a threat to international trade and private property. Their lodges became centers of anti-French propaganda and coordination of the economic blockade. Catholic emancipation in Ireland was met with resistance from English Freemasons, who saw it as a threat to Protestant dominance. Orange lodges in Northern Ireland became an outpost of British influence in this troubled region. Paradoxically, English Freemasons, who formally professed the ideas of freedom and equality, in practice defended a system based on social inequality and colonial domination. Their freedom was the privilege of the elect. Their equality was the equality of gentlemen. Berlin, the 1760s. Scientists, philosophers, and statesmen of the Prussian kingdom gather at the Three Globes Lodge. Here, a special type of Freemasonry emerges, German Freemasonry, where mystical quests are combined with rational science, and Enlightenment ideas serve state reforms. Frederick the Great did not simply patronize Freemasonry, he saw it as a tool for the modernization of Prussia. The philosopher King, who corresponded with Voltaire, understood the need for an educated bureaucracy for effective state governance. Masonic lodges became the forge of the Prussian bureaucratic elite. Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, the great German playwright and philosopher, formulated the ideal of German Freemasonry in his Conversations for Freemasons as a synthesis of ancient wisdom, Christian morality, and modern science. His concept of educating the human race through Masonic enlightenment became the program of German lodges. Johann Wolfgang Goethe, author of Faust, was an active Freemason and saw Brotherhood as the path to harmonious personal development. Masonic motifs play a key role in his novel Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. Goethe embodied the ideal of the German intellectual, for whom Freemasonry was a philosophical school rather than a political organization. A distinctive feature of German Freemasonry was its fascination with esoteric teachings. Adam Weishaupt's Order of the Illuminati, founded in Bavaria in 1776, attracted many German Freemasons with its ideas of rational social reform. Although the order was banned in 1785, its influence on the German intellectual elite proved to be long-lasting. Karl August, Duke of Weimar, turned his court into a center of German enlightenment. As a Freemason, he patronized Goethe, Schiller, and Herder. The Weimar Circle became a symbol of how Masonic ideas could serve cultural development without threatening political stability. The Prussian reforms of the early 19th century, the emancipation of the peasants, educational reform, and the creation of a modern army were largely prepared in Masonic lodges. Karl Stein, August Gartenberg, Wilhelm Humboldt, all these reformers were associated with Freemasonry and saw it as a source of ideas for modernizing the country. Immanuel Kant's philosophy had a profound influence on German Freemasons. His categorical imperative, "Act so that the maxim of your will could become a universal law," was perceived as the quintessence of Masonic morality. Kant, although not a Mason himself, became the spiritual mentor of many German brothers. The music of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, especially the magic flute, reflected Masonic ideals of enlightenment and moral perfection. The works of Masonic composers were played in lodges as hymns to reason and virtue. The German universities of Göttingen, Leipzig, and Halle became centers of scientific Freemasonry. Professor Freemasons saw their calling in the dissemination of knowledge and the education of a new generation of educated citizens. Through their efforts, Germany became a leader in European science. However, German Freemasonry also carried within it the seeds of future contradictions. The cult of national genius, the romanticization of German history, and ideas of cultural superiority would later be used by German nationalists to justify their claims to European hegemony. Naples, the 1790s. In the basements of the Palazzo, conspirators gather, dreaming of a united Italy. Italian Freemasons turned their lodges into centers of national resistance, preparing for liberation from Austrian rule and papal domination. Their path will be long and bloody, but it is they who will lay the foundations for the Risorgimento. Giuseppe Garibaldi, the future hero of Italian unification, was initiated into a Masonic lodge in Montevideo in 1844. Returning to Italy, he found in his Masonic brothers willing comrades in arms for the struggle for a united homeland. Italian lodges became the headquarters of the National Revolution. A distinctive feature of Italian Freemasonry was its anti-clerical orientation. The Papal States were perceived not only as a political opponent, but also as a symbol of medieval obscurantism. Freemasons saw the Catholic Church as the main obstacle to modern civilization. Their slogan, "A free church in a free state," became the program of liberal Italy. The Carbonari, a secret society of charcoal burners, were not formally Freemasons, but they adopted many Masonic rituals and organizational principles. Their uprisings in Naples and Piedmont in the 1820s, although ultimately defeated, demonstrated the strength of the Italian national movement. Camillo Cavour, the architect of Italian unification, was a Freemason and used his Masonic connections for diplomatic preparations for the Wars of Independence. His negotiations with Napoleon III, who was also associated with Freemasonry, were largely based on fraternal ties. Giuseppe Mazzini, the ideologist of Republican Italy, created the organization Young Italy, which became a secular alternative to Freemasonry. However, many of his associates were Freemasons, which ensured coordination between the various currents of the national movement. The victory in the War of 1859 against Austria was largely prepared by Masonic networks. Officers of the Sardinian Army, bound by fraternal ties, acted with remarkable coordination. Masonic lodges served as channels of communication between different regions of the future unified Italy. Garibaldi's Thousand Expedition in 1860 relied on the support of Sicilian Freemasons. Local lodges provided the Red Army with provisions, information about enemy movements, and volunteers. Without this assistance, the rapid conquest of Sicily would have been impossible. The unification of Italy in 1861 was a triumph for the Masonic project. Victor Emmanuel II, although not formally a Freemason, relied on the Masonic elite in the process of state building. Many ministers and parliamentarians of the New Italy were associated with lodges. The conflict with the Pope reached its peak after the capture of Rome in 1870. Pope Pius IX declared himself a prisoner of the Vatican and cursed the Freemasons as enemies of the faith. Italian Freemasons responded with anti-clerical campaigns and demands for the complete secularization of the state. Francesco Crispi, Prime Minister of Italy in the 1880s, was a Grand Master of Italian Freemasonry. Under him, the lodges became an informal center for political decision-making. Masonic connections determined appointments to government posts and the direction of foreign policy. The paradox of Italian Freemasonry was that, having achieved national unification, it itself split into rival factions. Northern and Southern lodges, monarchists and republicans, moderates and radicals, unity proved to be temporary, based only on a common enemy. Paris, July 14, 1789. The crowd storms the Bastille, but among the rebels there are many people with Masonic badges under their jackets. The French Revolution began as a Masonic project of enlightened reforms, but quickly turned into a bloody storm that devoured its own creators. Jacques-Pierre Brissot testifies in his memoirs that by 1789, Freemasons made up a significant part of the Estates General. Of the 600 deputies of the Third Estate, more than 300 were associated with lodges. This Masonic faction ensured a radical shift from class-based monarchy to national representation. The Marquis de Condorcet, philosopher and mathematician, Grand Master of the Nine Sisters Lodge, became one of the theorists of revolutionary democracy. His sketch for a historical picture of the progress of the human mind anticipated many of the Jacobins' ideas about the restructuring of society on rational principles. Olympe de Gouges, author of the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen, was connected to Masonic circles through Madame Roland's salon. The idea of gender equality, which seemed revolutionary even to the Freemasons, found a passionate advocate in her. Her execution in 1793 symbolized the revolution's turn against its own ideals. Georges Danton, the Archangel of the Revolution, used his Masonic connections to mobilize Parisian sections against the Royalists. His Cordeliers Club served as a link between Masonic lodges and the revolutionary masses. Danton understood that without popular support, the Masonic elite would remain powerless. Maximilien Robespierre, although not a Freemason, relied on the Masonic network to carry out his policy of terror. His cult of the Supreme Being copied Masonic rituals, but replaced the Christian God with an abstract deity of reason. Robespierre saw himself as the great architect of a new society. Paradoxically, it was the Freemasons who became the main victims of the revolution they themselves had prepared. Philippe Égalité, Grand Master of the Grand Orient de France, was executed as a traitor in 1793. His fate symbolized the collapse of the liberal phase of the revolution. Antoine Lavoisier, a great chemist and Freemason, died on the guillotine with the words, "The Republic has no need of scientists." The revolution devoured the enlightened elite that had created it. Many Freemasons emigrated, taking with them the ideas of constitutional monarchy and liberal reforms. The Jacobins' calendar reform replaced the Christian calendar with a revolutionary one. The new names of the months, Vendémiaire, Brumaire, Frimaire, reflected the desire to create a completely new civilization. The Masonic idea of the symbolic transformation of the world had reached its logical conclusion. The cult of reason established in Notre Dame Cathedral copied Masonic ceremonies of worship of the great architect of the universe. But instead of an enlightened brotherhood, a fanatical cult emerged that demanded human sacrifices in the name of abstract principles. The Thermidorian reaction of 1794 was largely the work of surviving Freemasons who attempted to return the revolution to a civilized course. Joseph Fouché, Minister of Police of the Directory, used his Masonic connections to stabilize the political situation. General Bonaparte, the future Emperor Napoleon, although not formally a Freemason, understood the importance of Masonic networks for governing the country. He restored the lodges, placing them under state control. Freemasonry became an instrument of imperial policy. The revolution revealed the ambivalence of Masonic ideals. Freedom turned into anarchy, equality into leveling, and brotherhood into civil war. French Freemasons created modern political culture, but paid for it with their own lives. Austerlitz, December 2, 1805. Napoleon defeated the combined armies of Austria and Russia, but his victory had a hidden dimension. There were many Freemasons among the French officers and among their opponents as well. The Napoleonic Wars turned into a clash of Masonic systems, where brotherhood gave way to national interests. Although Emperor Napoleon himself was not formally initiated into Freemasonry, he understood its political value. In 1804, he appointed his brother Joseph as Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France. Masonic lodges became an instrument of French influence in occupied Europe. Marshal Murat, King of Naples, actively used Masonic connections to strengthen French domination in Italy. Italian Freemasons saw the Napoleonic occupation as a chance to free themselves from Austrian rule. The conflict between national and Masonic loyalties became a source of constant conflict. The situation in Prussia was particularly complex. Many Prussian officers who were Freemasons fought against the French at Jena and Auerstedt, but in the lodges they met with their French brothers as equals. Fichte and other German philosophers began to develop a theory of true German Freemasonry, as opposed to French pseudo-Freemasonry. The continental blockade of England had a Masonic dimension. English Freemasons lost their connections with European lodges, which weakened international Masonic networks. Napoleon deliberately used this isolation to strengthen French influence in continental Freemasonry. Joseph de Maistre, a Sardinian diplomat and philosopher, harshly criticized Freemasonry as a source of revolutionary godlessness in his St. Petersburg Evenings. His influence on the Russian aristocracy contributed to a cooling of attitudes toward Freemasonry in Russia. Mikhail Speransky, author of Alexander Thurn's liberal reforms, was associated with Masonic circles, but after the War of 1812, he fell out of favor precisely because of suspicions of Masonic sympathies. The patriotic reaction against everything French also affected Russian Freemasonry. The Patriotic War of 1812 was a test for the international Masonic Brotherhood. Russian and French Freemasons killed each other on the Borodino field, forgetting their oaths of mutual assistance. Nationalist sentiments proved stronger than Masonic bonds. The wars of liberation in Germany mobilized German Freemasons against French domination. Student fraternities, many of whose members were Freemasons, formed volunteer units to fight Napoleon. The Masonic idea of brotherhood among nations turned into German nationalism. The Congress of Vienna in 1814 to 1815 brought together Masonic diplomats from different countries, but their negotiations were determined not by Masonic principles, but by state interests. Talleyrand, the Grand Master of French Freemasonry, bargained with his Austrian and Russian colleagues as a pragmatic politician. The Holy Alliance of Alexander I, Franz I, and Frederick William III was an attempt to create a Christian alternative to Masonic ideals of enlightenment. Mystical Christianity was opposed to the rational deism of the Freemasons. Napoleon's 100 Days showed that Masonic networks remained loyal to the emperor even after his abdication. Many of the officers who returned to him from Elba were bound by Masonic ties. Waterloo was not only a military defeat, but also a Masonic one. The restoration of the Bourbons in France led to repression against Freemasons who had compromised themselves by collaborating with the usurper. The White Terror of 1815 affected many lodges. French Freemasonry was forced to go underground and wait for better times. Paris, July 1830. The Three Glorious Days, overthrow Charles the Rig, and Louis-Philippe d'Orléans, the citizen king, is established on the French throne. Behind the barricades, not only workers and students fought, but also members of secret societies, the heirs of revolutionary Freemasonry. The Restoration gave rise to new forms of conspiracy. The Carbonari, who had penetrated France from Italy, created a network of secret lodges based on the Masonic model, but with a republican agenda. Their rituals copied Masonic ceremonies, but their oaths were directed against the monarchy. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the future Emperor Napoleon III, was a Carbonaro in his youth and participated in conspiracies against the papal government. Lafayette, a veteran of 2 revolutions and a lifelong Freemason, became commander of the National Guard and the de facto leader of the liberal opposition. His salon became the headquarters of moderate Republicans who saw the July monarchy as only the first step toward a republic. The Society of the Friends of the People, of which the young Alexandre Dumas was a member, brought together intellectuals and bourgeoisie dissatisfied with the compromising nature of the new regime. Their meetings resembled Masonic lodges, but they discussed specific political actions against the government of Louis-Philippe. In Germany, the student movement that originated in the Wars of Liberation was transformed into a network of secret societies. The Black-Red-Gold alliances demanded constitutional rule and national unification. Many of their members were Freemasons, but their nationalism was moving further and further away from the cosmopolitan Masonic ideals. The Decembrist uprising in Russia in 1825 had Masonic roots. Pavel Pestel, author of Russian Truth, and many other conspirators were associated with lodges. But their program, from constitutional monarchy to republic, went beyond traditional Freemasonry. The Polish uprising of 1830 to 1831 mobilized Masonic networks to fight for independence. Adam Czartoryski and other Polish aristocrats used international Masonic connections to obtain foreign support, but without success. The July Revolution in France inspired liberals throughout Europe. In Belgium, an uprising broke out against Dutch rule, and in the Italian states, against Austrian rule. Masonic networks served as channels of coordination between revolutionaries in different countries. Giuseppe Mazzini creates Young Italy as an alternative to Freemasonry, which he considers too aristocratic and cosmopolitan. His concept of Young Europe anticipates future nationalism based on ethnic rather than Masonic principles. Louis-Philippe, the king of the barricades, tries to rely on the Masonic bourgeoisie, but his policy of the golden mean satisfies neither the Republicans nor the Legitimists. Masonic lodges are divided between supporters and opponents of the Orleanist monarchy. The economic crises of the 1830s and 1840s gave rise to new social movements. Louis Blanc and other socialists criticized Freemasonry as a bourgeois organization incapable of solving the labor question. Masonic ideals of brotherhood clashed with class struggle. The Revolution of 1848 in France overthrew Louis-Philippe and proclaimed the Second Republic. Alphonse de Lamartine, a poet and Freemason, became head of the provisional government. But his moderate policies could not reconcile social contradictions. The rise to power of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte signaled the end of the liberal experiment. The future Napoleon III used his Masonic connections to come to power, but then placed the lodges under strict state control. Freemasonry once again became an instrument of authoritarian power. The paradox of the Restoration era was that the attempt to return to pre-revolutionary order gave rise to even more radical forms of opposition. Freemasonry, which sought gradual reform, gave way to secret societies ready for revolutionary violence. Paris, February 1848. The Spring of Nations sweeps across Europe from the Atlantic to the Carpathians. The revolutionary wave washes away the old regimes, but behind the visible unity of popular anger lies a struggle between different Masonic concepts of the future. Each country follows its own path to freedom. Alphonse de Lamartine, poet and Freemason, heads the provisional government of the French Republic. His History of the Girondins inspired a new generation of revolutionaries, but his moderate policies cannot cope with the radical demands of the Parisian proletariat. Masonic ideals of gradual reform clash with socialist utopias. In Germany, the Frankfurt Parliament brings together liberals from all German states. Among the deputies are many Freemasons who dream of a constitutional empire under Prussian leadership. But their discussions about a Greater German or Lesser German solution reflect the split between Austrian and Prussian Masonic traditions. Gabriel Risser, a fighter for Jewish emancipation and vice president of the Frankfurt Parliament, represents a new type of Freemason, a defender of minority rights. His activities show how Masonic principles of equality are applied to national and religious issues. In the Austrian Empire, The revolution takes on a national character. Hungarian Freemasons, led by Lajos Kossuth, demand independence, Czech Freemasons demand autonomy, and Italian Freemasons demand annexation to Piedmont. The Masonic idea of brotherhood among nations leads to the collapse of the multinational empire. Count Julius Andrassy, future foreign minister of Austria-Hungary, participated in the Hungarian Revolution as a Freemason and liberal in his youth. His evolution from revolutionary to conservative statesman reflects the fate of an entire generation of European politicians. Giuseppe Garibaldi arrives in Milan to take part in the war against Austria, but finds Italian Freemasons divided between Mazzini's Republicans and Carlo Alberto's monarchists. The unity of the national movement turns out to be illusory. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels criticize Freemasonry as a bourgeois organization incapable of resolving the social contradictions of capitalism. Their analysis of class struggle contrasts with Masonic ideals of social harmony. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, elected president of the French Republic, uses Masonic connections to strengthen his position. His nephew Napoleon Jérôme becomes Grand Master of French Freemasonry, providing political support for the future coup. The suppression of the June workers' uprising in Paris by General Cavaignac reveals the limits of bourgeois liberalism. Republican Freemasons are forced to choose between social revolution and order. The majority chooses order. The defeat of the revolutions in Germany and Austria led to a reaction and the emigration of liberals. Many Freemasons left for America, taking with them the ideals of constitutional government. European Freemasonry lost an entire generation of activists. Nicholas I, who suppressed the Hungarian Revolution, sees Freemasonry as the source of all European turmoil. His policy of repression against secret societies is emulated by other conservative regimes. Freemasonry is forced to adapt to the new conditions. The revolutions of 1848 showed the ambivalence of Masonic ideals in the era of nationalism. Cosmopolitan brotherhood was shattered by national borders. Liberal reforms gave way to radical demands, and social harmony gave way to class struggle. The paradox of the Spring of Nations was that it was both the peak and the collapse of classical European Freemasonry. Freemasons participated in all the revolutions, but were unable to offer a unifying program. Their time had passed, giving way to new political forces. Turin, 1859. Camillo Cavour signs the Plombières Agreement with Napoleon III, preparing for war against Austria. Both politicians are bound by Masonic ties, but their alliance is based not on fraternal ideals, but on cold calculation. The unification of Italy becomes a game of European powers, where Freemasonry serves only as a diplomatic tool. Victor Emmanuel II, although not formally a Freemason, surrounds himself with Freemason ministers. Cavour, Rattazzi, Ricasoli, the entire liberal elite of Piedmont is connected to the lodges. They see Freemasonry not as a secret society, but as a school of modern state administration. The Battle of Solferino demonstrates the new role of Masonic networks in military diplomacy. French and Piedmontese Masonic officers coordinate their actions against the Austrians, many of whom also belong to lodges. Brotherhood gives way to national loyalty. Giuseppe Garibaldi prepared his campaign in the strictest secrecy, but relied on the Masonic network for financing and supplying the expedition. English Masons transferred money through Maltese banks. French Masons provided weapons, and Italian Masons provided volunteers. The landing at Marsala is made possible by the support of Sicilian Freemasons, who have been preparing an uprising against the Bourbons for years. Baron Niccolo Turini and other local leaders turned their estates into Garibaldi's strongholds. Francesco Crispi, the future Prime Minister of Italy, became Garibaldi's right-hand man in the Sicilian campaign. His Masonic connections secured the support of the European liberal press, which presented the campaign as a struggle for freedom against tyranny. Naples surrendered without serious resistance, largely due to the betrayal of Bourbon officers recruited by Masonic agents. Francesco II, the last king of the two Sicilies, could not even rely on his own army. Garibaldi's meeting with Victor Emmanuel in Teano symbolizes the union of the Republican and monarchist wings of the Italian movement. But behind the theatrical gestures lies a struggle between various Masonic groups for control of a united Italy. Pope Pius IX responds to the loss of the Papal States with an encyclical against Freemasonry, declaring all Freemasons excommunicated from the Church. This decision deepens the rift between Catholic and liberal Italy, which will determine the country's politics for decades to come. The capture of Rome in 1870 completes the unification of Italy, but begins the Roman question. Freemasons celebrate the fall of the last bastion of obscurantism, but do not take into account the strength of the Catholic reaction among the masses. Adriano Lemmi, Grand Master of Italian Freemasonry in the 1880s, turned the lodges into an informal center of political power. His influence on ministerial appointments and banking policy caused scandals and strengthened anti-Masonic sentiment. Francesco Crispi, becoming prime minister, pursued an anti-clerical policy relying on Masonic support. His authoritarian methods and colonial adventures in Africa compromised the liberal ideals of Freemasonry. The Bank of Rome scandal of the 1890s exposed corrupt links between Masonic financiers and the government. Public opinion began to equate Freemasonry with oligarchy and abuse of power. The growth of the socialist movement created a new challenge for Italian Freemasonry. Workers saw the lodges as organizations of the bourgeois elite, incapable of solving social problems. Masonic ideals of brotherhood clashed with class contradictions. The paradox of Italian unification was that the Masonic dream of a free and united Italy came true, but brought disappointment. Instead of a kingdom of justice, a bourgeois state emerged with the traditional vices of corruption and favoritism. Berlin, 1871. Otto von Bismarck celebrates victory over France and the proclamation of the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The Iron Chancellor is not a Freemason. Moreover, he sees Freemasonry as a threat to Prussian order and German unity. His Kulturkampf will become a systematic attack on liberal values. The Prussian military system, created by Moltke and Rohn, is based on discipline and hierarchy, which are contrary to Masonic ideals of equality. The officer corps is purged of liberal elements, many of whom were associated with lodges. The new Germany is built on the principles of iron and blood, rather than enlightened philosophy. Rudolf Virchow, the great pathologist and liberal politician, remained one of the few Freemasons in the Prussian Landtag, but his influence waned under the pressure of conservative reaction. The era of scientific optimism was replaced by a time of nationalist mobilization. The Kulturkampf against the Catholic Church paradoxically also affects Freemasonry, which Bismarck considers to be just as international and anti-state. Prussian officials received tacit instructions not to accept Freemasons into public service. Adolf Stöcker, court preacher and founder of the Christian Social Party, develops the theory of a Jewish Masonic conspiracy, which will become the basis for future anti-Semitism. His sermons resonate with the petty bourgeoisie, frightened by capitalist modernization. The economic boom of the 1870s creates a new class of industrialists, many of whom shun the Masonic traditions of their fathers. Krupp, Siemens, and Thyssen build their empires on the principles of fierce competition rather than Masonic brotherhood. Heinrich von Treitschke, an influential historian and publicist, formulates a new German ideology based on the cult of state power. His lectures at the University of Berlin educate a generation of officials hostile to liberal ideas. The anti-socialist law of 1878 is directed against the labor movement, but its provisions also apply to Masonic lodges suspected of subversive activities. Many lodges are forced to disband or go deep underground. The Berlin Congress of 1878 demonstrates Germany's new role in European politics. Bismarck orchestrates the redivision of the Balkans, disregarding the Masonic ties between the participants. Realpolitik finally triumphs over Enlightenment ideals. The German-Austrian alliance of 1879 created a military bloc to counter the Franco-Russian rapprochement. Masonic ties between European elites could not prevent the continent from splitting into hostile coalitions. Wilhelm II, who ascended the throne in 1888, dismissed Bismarck but continued his anti-Masonic policy. The young Kaiser saw German Freemasonry as a Trojan horse of Western liberalism. The Pan-German League, founded in 1891, preached the racial superiority of the Germans and the need for territorial expansion. Its ideology was directly opposed to Masonic cosmopolitanism and human brotherhood. Industrial cartels and banking monopolies are forming a new economic elite that prefers direct ties to the government over Masonic networks. German capitalism is developing in an authoritarian rather than a liberal direction. The scientific achievements of German universities, Planck's physics, Liebig's chemistry, Koch's medicine, create a cult of technical rationality, opposed to Masonic symbolism and rituals. The new Germany believes in science and technology, not ancient mysteries. The tragedy of German Freemasonry was that it was unable to adapt to the new era of the nation-state and industrial capitalism. The Enlightenment ideals of the 18th century proved helpless in the face of the modernization challenges of the 19th. Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. Gavrilo Princip's shots not only killed Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but also buried the dream of European Masonic brotherhood. A month later, the continent would be plunged into a bloody slaughter, where Freemasons from different countries would kill each other in the trenches, forgetting their vows of mutual aid. The Grand Orient of France and the United Grand Lodge of England immediately severed ties with German Masonic organizations. The principle of universal brotherhood collapses under the weight of national prejudices. French Freemasons curse the Prussian barbarians. English Freemasons pray for victory over the Huns. And German Freemasons call for a holy war against the Slavic threat. General Joffre, the victor at the Marne, and General Falkenhayn, his opponent at Verdun, were both Freemasons, but this did not prevent them from planning each other's destruction. The Masonic ties between the French and German generals, strong in peacetime, evaporated instantly with the declaration of war. Marshal Foch, the future commander-in-chief of the Allied forces, uses Masonic networks to coordinate with British and American allies. Lodges serve as channels for informal diplomacy and military planning, but only within the warring coalitions. In Russia, Freemasons found themselves in a difficult position. Many of them, including Alexander Kerensky, criticized the Tsarist regime for its unpreparedness for war, but could not openly oppose the patriotic mobilization. Russian lodges were divided between loyalty to the Allies and opposition to autocracy. Douglas Haig, commander of the British Expeditionary Force in France, a Freemason and Scottish aristocrat, sees the war as a test of Anglo-Saxon civilization. His strategy of attrition reflects the English Masonic doctrine of gradual progress through trials. Ludendorff and Hindenburg, although not Freemasons themselves, understood the importance of Masonic networks for military intelligence. German counterintelligence systematically tracked Masonic connections between the Entente countries in an attempt to anticipate the enemy's plans. The American entry into the war in 1917 mobilizes powerful Masonic resources against the Central Powers. President Woodrow Wilson, although not formally a Mason, relies on the Masonic lobby to justify the war for democracy. The October Revolution in Russia destroyed the last illusions about Masonic internationalism. The Bolsheviks declared Freemasonry a bourgeois prejudice and closed all Russian lodges. Kerensky and other Masonic liberals found themselves between the hammer of Bolshevism and the anvil of counter-revolution. The Compiègne Armistice of November 11, 1918, is signed in Marshal Foch's railway carriage. There are many Freemasons among the victors, but their triumph is bittersweet. The Brotherhood is destroyed, Europe lies in ruins, and a fundamentally new society, hostile to all old traditions, is already being built in Russia. President Woodrow Wilson arrives in Versailles with his 14 Points program, largely inspired by Masonic ideals of international law and collective security. The League of Nations was to be the embodiment of the Masonic dream of a world government based on reason and justice. But his plans are shattered by the selfishness of the European allies, who prefer territorial conquests to philosophical principles. David Lloyd George and Georges Clemenceau, both associated with Freemasonry, pursue a harsh policy towards defeated Germany. The Treaty of Versailles becomes a document of revenge rather than justice. Masonic principles of generosity and reconciliation gave way to national prejudices and economic interests. Alexander Kerensky, the last head of the Russian provisional government, fled into exile, taking with him his dreams of constitutional democracy. His fall symbolized the collapse of liberal Freemasonry in a country that chose Bolshevik radicalism over gradual reform. The collapse of four empires, German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman, paved the way for new forces hostile to Freemasonry. The Bolsheviks in Russia declared lodges to be bourgeois relics. The fascists in Italy saw them as a threat to national unity, and the Nazis in Germany considered them part of a Jewish Masonic conspiracy. The paradox of the post-war settlement was that the victory of democracies did not lead to the triumph of Masonic ideals. On the contrary, the war gave rise to new forms of totalitarianism that were incompatible with the principles of individual freedom and international brotherhood. Europe, exhausted by war, became easy prey for radical movements. The Russian Revolution of 1917 dealt a particularly heavy blow to international Freemasonry. The country, where lodges played an important role in the liberal movement, turned into a testing ground for a social experiment that rejected all traditional values. The Masonic intelligentsia was destroyed or expelled, and its place was taken by professional revolutionaries. The creation of new nation-states in Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, opened up opportunities for the revival of Freemasonry. But the war had left too deep a wound. Nationalism proved stronger than cosmopolitan ideals, and economic difficulties did not encourage philosophical reflection. American isolation after the refusal to ratify the Treaty of Versailles deprived European Freemasonry of an important pillar of support. The United States, where lodges enjoyed the greatest influence, turned away from European squabbles, leaving their continental brothers alone with their problems. The Great War demonstrated the illusory nature of Masonic internationalism in an era of mass armies and total mobilization. Nation-states proved capable of mobilizing resources that the Freemasons of the 18th century could not have dreamed of. The era of gentlemanly wars was over, and the age of industrial slaughter had begun. The consequences of the war forever changed the character of European Freemasonry. The cosmopolitan Brotherhood of the Enlightenment was replaced by nationalist organizations serving the interests of individual states. Universal ideals fell victim to total mobilization and propaganda confrontation. The memory of fallen brothers became a heavy burden for the surviving Freemasons. How could one speak of universal brotherhood when millions of Freemasons were killing each other in the trenches of the Western Front? The war exposed the contradiction between ideal and reality, between philosophy and politics, between dream and history. Rome, October 28, 1922. Benito Mussolini, at the head of the Black Shirts, marches on the Capitol. Many of his opponents are Freemasons, but they are powerless in the face of a new political force that rejects all traditional values. Fascism declares war not only on democracy, but also on Freemasonry as a symbol of the liberal past. From the very beginning, Il Duce sees Freemasons as enemies of the totalitarian state. His program for building a new Italy leaves no room for independent organizations, especially international ones. Masonic lodges are closed one after another. Their property is confiscated, and members are forced to publicly renounce their beliefs under threat of imprisonment. Adolf Hitler, who came to power in Germany in 1933, went even further than his Italian ally. Nazi ideology declared Freemasonry to be part of a Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy against the Aryan race. The NSDAP's program documents contain entire sections devoted to combating Masonic influence on German society. Heinrich Himmler created a special SS department to combat Freemasonry and occult societies. Paradoxically, the Nazis, who were themselves fascinated by ancient Germanic mysticism and runic symbolism, saw Masonic rituals as dangerous competition to their own ideology. Lodges were not simply banned, they were systematically destroyed. In France, Freemasons found themselves caught between two fires. The Grand Orient supported Léon Blum's Popular Front against the growing fascist threat, but this only reinforced the anti-Masonic propaganda of the right wing. French fascist groups demanded that Freemasonry be banned as an anti-national and anti-patriotic force. Great Britain remains the last bastion of free Freemasonry in Europe, but even here the lodges are forced to adapt to the realities of war. British Freemasons discreetly support the anti-fascist struggle on the continent, but avoid open political participation, learning from the tragic experience of their European colleagues. The Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939 becomes a bloody rehearsal for the future world conflict. General Franco, supported by Hitler and Mussolini, declared Freemasonry a state crime immediately after the start of the military uprising. The Republican government, which included many Freemasons, received moral support from the lodges of democratic countries. Joseph Stalin in the USSR conducts his own ruthless campaign against the remnants of Freemasonry, declaring it a bourgeois relic and a tool of Western agents. Soviet propaganda portrays Freemasons as hidden enemies of socialism, linked to international capital and White Guard emigration. The Munich Agreement of 1938 demonstrates the complete impotence of Western democracies in the face of fascist expansion. Masonic ties between British, French, and Czechoslovak politicians cannot prevent the shameful capitulation to Hitler and the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. The outbreak of World War II on September 1, 1939, finally destroyed what remained of European Masonic unity. Nazi aggression against Poland mobilized Western Freemasons to fight against Hitler's regime, but French lodges were banned by the Vichy government the following year. The Holocaust affected not only the Jewish population, but also European Freemasons, whom the Nazis considered part of a hostile world conspiracy. In concentration camps, Freemasons wore red triangles as a sign of political prisoners and were subjected to particularly cruel treatment by the guards. The resistance movement in Nazi-occupied Europe relied in part on surviving Masonic networks, which provided clandestine communication between scattered underground groups. French, Belgian, Dutch, and Norwegian Freemasons used their centuries-old experience of secret organization to coordinate the anti-fascist struggle. General de Gaulle, head of the Free France movement, understands the strategic value of Masonic ties in mobilizing international support. The London Committee receives assistance from British and American lodges, which see it as a symbol of hope for the restoration of European democracy after the defeat of fascism. Yalta, February 1945. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin divide post-war Europe into spheres of influence. Two of them are connected to Freemasonry, but their decisions are determined not by fraternal ties, but by the cold calculation of high politics. The Iron Curtain, which would soon descend across the continent, would divide the Masonic Brotherhood into two hostile camps. President Franklin Roosevelt, a 32nd degree Mason, saw the post-war world order as an opportunity to spread democratic values throughout the world. The United Nations was to become the embodiment of the Masonic dream of a world government based on the principles of justice and international law. But his negotiations with Stalin show that idealistic principles inevitably give way to geopolitical necessity. Winston Churchill, although not formally a Freemason, understood perfectly well the importance of Masonic networks for the restoration of Western European democracies after the Nazi occupation. His famous speech in Fulton about the Iron Curtain ushered in an era of global confrontation between the Masonic West and the Communist East. Joseph Stalin systematically destroyed the last remnants of Freemasonry in the countries of the Soviet sphere of influence. In Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia, Masonic lodges were immediately banned as agents of Western imperialism. Thousands of Freemasons were arrested by state security agencies and sent to concentration camps. General Dwight Eisenhower, commander of the Allied forces in Europe and future U.S. president, actively used his Masonic connections to coordinate with European allies in the post-war reconstruction effort. The Marshall Plan is partially implemented through Masonic networks in Western European capitals, ensuring the rapid mobilization of elites for the American program. Jean Monnet, the father of a united Europe, and chief architect of European integration, although not formally a Freemason, relied on Masonic circles to promote the revolutionary idea of supranational cooperation. The European coal and steel community became the first practical step toward realizing the old Masonic dream of a United States of Europe. Konrad Adenauer, the first Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, carried out the denazification and democratization of the country, relying in part on surviving German Freemasons who could attest to their anti-Nazi stance. The restoration of German lodges in 1948 symbolized Germany's return to the civilized community of Western nations. Walter Ulbricht in East Germany, on the contrary, methodically completes Hitler's work of finally destroying German Freemasonry in the Soviet occupation zone. The German Democratic Republic becomes a model police state, where any independent organizations are seen as a potential threat to the party's monopoly on power. Charles de Gaulle, triumphantly returning to power in France, restored the traditional lodges of the Grand Orient and the Grand Lodge of France, but placed them under strict state control. Gaullist France skillfully uses Masonic international connections to strengthen its influence in Africa and build an independent third way between American and Soviet hegemony. Josip Broz Tito, in socialist Yugoslavia, pursued a relatively liberal policy towards Freemasonry, allowing limited activity by some lodges on condition of their unconditional loyalty to the socialist regime and non-participation in international Masonic organizations. The Yugoslav experiment became a rare exception in the monolithic socialist camp. The North Atlantic Alliance, created in 1949, united countries with strong Masonic traditions into a military-political bloc against the communist threat from the East. NATO became the geopolitical expression of Western Masonic unity in opposition to Eastern despotism and atheistic materialism. The Warsaw Pact, founded in 1955 as a direct response to the creation of NATO, unites states where Freemasonry is completely banned and severely persecuted. The socialist community is consciously built on principles that are diametrically opposed to the Masonic ideals of individual freedom and international brotherhood. The paradox of the Cold War was that Freemasonry, which had preached universal human brotherhood for centuries, suddenly became an ideological weapon of one of the opposing blocs. Western democracies actively used Masonic networks to coordinate the anti-communist struggle. But this turned the ancient brotherhood into an instrument of geopolitical confrontation and destroyed its non-partisan character. Berlin, November 9, 1989. The fall of the Berlin Wall symbolizes the collapse of the communist system and the triumph of Western values throughout Eastern Europe. Among the jubilant Berliners smashing the hated symbol of division with hammers are Freemasons, who see this historic event as a long-awaited return to the Enlightenment ideals of freedom and brotherhood. Mikhail Gorbachev, carrying out revolutionary perestroika in the Soviet Union, allowed public organizations to operate freely for the first time in 70 years, including the revival of Masonic lodges. The first Russian lodges were revived after a long hiatus, with the active support of Western European Grand Lodges, but immediately faced deep mistrust from society and active opposition from the Russian Orthodox Church. Pope John Paul II, a Pole by birth and a witness to the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, cautiously softened the centuries-old Catholic position on Freemasonry, but did not fundamentally lift the canonical ban on Catholic membership in the Masonic lodges. His pontificate reflected a complex attempt to find a historical compromise between church tradition and the demands of modernization in the post-communist world. Jacques Chirac in France and Helmut Kohl in reunified Germany, both closely associated with influential Masonic circles, became the chief architects of deeper European integration. The Maastricht Treaty of 1992, creating the European Union with a single currency, is the practical embodiment of the old Masonic utopia of a politically united Europe without internal borders. Vladimir Putin, who came to power in Russia at the turn of the millennium, pursues a characteristically ambivalent policy towards the resurgent Freemasonry. Formally, the activities of lodges are permitted by the Constitution, but in fact, they are under constant unofficial surveillance by the special services. Russian Freemasons are forced to carefully balance their Western international ties with demonstrations of patriotic loyalty to the state. NATO's eastward expansion includes former socialist countries with reviving Masonic traditions in the transatlantic alliance. Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and the Baltic states are vigorously restoring their historical lodges, rightly seeing this as an important symbol of their final return to European civilization after half a century of communist rule. The bloody Balkan Wars of the 1990s clearly demonstrate the complete impotence of traditional Masonic ideals in the face of resurgent ethnic nationalism and religious fanaticism. The centuries-old fraternal ties between Yugoslav Freemasons of different nationalities cannot prevent the violent and bloody collapse of the multinational federation. Sarajevo, where World War I once began, once again becomes a tragic symbol of European catastrophe. The process of economic and cultural globalization creates fundamentally new opportunities for Masonic internationalism and the coordination of the activities of lodges in different countries, but at the same time gives rise to powerful anti-globalization movements that see Freemasonry as an ominous symbol of a secret global conspiracy by the financial elites. The Internet contributes to the rapid spread of various conspiracy theories about Masonic control over the global economy, politics, and culture. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, in New York directly affected the American Masonic community. Many brothers died in the collapsed Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. The Bush administration's declaration of a war on international terrorism created entirely new challenges for the traditional Masonic principles of religious tolerance and inter-civilizational dialogue. Brexit in the mid-2000s painfully reflects the deep crisis of the European integration project and a dangerous return to narrow national sovereignty. British Freemasons find themselves divided between supporters of European unity and defenders of national independence, which clearly symbolizes more fundamental contradictions in the modern Masonic movement. The rapid rise of populist movements across Europe, from Germany's Alternative for Germany to Salvini's Italian League, poses serious new threats to liberal Masonic values. Populists actively use anti-elitist rhetoric, in which Freemasons are invariably portrayed as an integral part of a corrupt cosmopolitan establishment, detached from the interests of the people. The COVID-19 pandemic is rapidly accelerating the digitization of public life, and at the same time giving rise to new conspiracy theories about the Great Reset and the sinister role of Freemasons in establishing a new world order. Lodges around the world are forced to urgently switch to online meetings, which radically changes the traditional nature of personal fraternal communication. Contemporary European Freemasons face a dilemma: remain faithful to historical traditions or adapt to the challenges of a globalized world. Artificial intelligence, digital technologies, and virtual reality raise fundamental questions about the future of human brotherhood in the era of technological singularity.